Well, good evening and welcome to the Lower Makefield Township Patterson Farm Master Plan Implementation Committee meeting for July 11th. My name is Steadman. I'm the chair of this committee. We have a quorum tonight. If I could ask, starting on my left, the committee members to introduce themselves.
Ron Schmid. I was on, sorry.
Fred Childs.
Peter Solor.
And on Zoom, we have...
Joe Camaratta.
Very good, thank you. Jenifer Stark could not make it tonight, but we have 5 out of the 6 members. We have a quorum, and I understand that Dan Grenier, our Board of Supervisor liaison, is en route and will join us shortly. If you're watching on Zoom, welcome, or in the public, welcome very much. We appreciate everyone's input and dialogue. This is an open forum. With that, I'd like to call the meeting to order. And the first item on the agenda is the review and approval of the June 13th meeting minutes. They were circulated, ready for approval, subject to this meeting. Are there any comments, edits, additions?
No.
Hearing none, do I have a motion to approve as presented?
Motion to approve.
Second.
It's first and second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Thank you. The June meeting minutes are approved. Thank you for that. We have on our agenda an update from, we have 2 subcommittees. An update from our Building Projects and Enhancement Subcommittee, and with some detail under that, as well as an update from the Nonprofit and Funding Subcommittee. But before we get into each one of those subcommittees, I wanted to read in for the record and in the minutes a summary memo that we received from Dave Kratzer today. We had some very impactful meeting out at on the site here recently, and there's been a lot of progress in recent weeks. So because Dave could not attend, he wanted to be sure to provide this input because it'll potentially impact the later discussion. So I'm going to provide you what he sent, and he sent it to the full committee, and he sent it to the Board of Supervisors as well. First item to report on is the Bucks County Redevelopment Authority. They have agreed to conduct a Phase 1 environmental assessment at the site at their expense. That's a real accomplishment. That has been engaged. All the documentations are signed, and they're looking to schedule a kickoff meeting with the consultants themselves and a couple members of this committee here as soon as we can. So one of the questions for at least the 5 committee members who are available, if you could, after the meeting, maybe respond to David with your availability for that meeting. I think he wants 2 members, and once he knows your availability over the next week or so, he'll schedule that kickoff meeting, and that'll be important to get that environmental Phase 1 underway. He's also been told that our consultants were able to attain additional funding through the EPA to conduct hazmat assessments and surveys beyond what they originally thought they could do. This would include the testing of the lead paint on the dwellings themselves, as we talked about on site yesterday, which would not normally be part of a Phase 1. So that's a very useful step, and we're very appreciative of that EPA funding. And we'll find out a lot more about that at the kickoff meeting with the Bucks County Redevelopment Authority and the consultants. The Phase 1 environmental assessment will be conducted. We're expecting that is about a 2-month time horizon. But at the time the inspections are made, reports are written and reviewed. But that's not a deadline, it's just an expectation. But they're very experienced consultants working on this. Also, we met out at Patterson Farm with Vince and Joe DeLuca. As you'll hear in the nonprofit and fundraising portion subcommittee, we are just in the very early stages of beginning structuring a capital plan. We have begun to network in the community with wealthy residents and those corporations with resources that may be interested in supporting nonprofit activities. That included the DeLucas. And so we met with them on site yesterday because they wanted to better understand and appreciate the project. Dan Grenier, our supervisor liaison, welcome. We've started, just going through it. They have been very interested in supporting this kind of initiative of restoration and community utilization of the farm. They're going to, they agreed that they were going to work on getting some scope and pricing information for some of the, and by leveraging some of their contractors and engineering relationships for some of the utility-based items that are in the Phase 1 plan, and as well as some of the anticipated new driveway, farmer access kinds of infrastructure. They're lending their expertise and their kind of network of resources to help prime the pump on some of those cost estimates and some of the early engineering work that would need to be done. And so that was a very, very appreciated and generous offer from Vince and Joe DeLuca. We were also on site looking at some of the property cleanup, just general kind of maintenance around the grounds themselves in terms of trimming and lawn care. We reviewed what was necessary in some cases, vines being pulled off of buildings that would be causing damage, or some ivy growing around the buildings, shrubbery. It was determined by Public Works, given the scope of the work and the nature of it, Public Works agreed that they would take all that on. It didn't necessarily fit a volunteer assignment kind of day. And they have agreed in the next week they're going to go out and begin some of that cleanup around the buildings that are necessary, both for not just aesthetics, but for the preservation of the structures themselves, because if there are plants or vines up against them, the shading would not be good for them. So they've agreed to take those steps. We'll hear more about that from Peter later. And the thought came that if there is a volunteer day opportunity to get more community involvement, that would probably a better scenario would be a beautification type of day, where rather than pulling out poison ivy or trimming a limb, maybe planting some mums and doing some things to beautify, not just kind of clean up. So his memo was sent, like I say, to the full committee and to the Board of Supervisors. I just wanted to read that right up front because it impacts a number of the subjects that we'll be talking about today. So with that, let's turn to the third agenda item, which is the Building Protections and Enhancement Subcommittee update. That's Peter, Fred, and Jenifer Stark, who can't be with us tonight. So I want to hear an update from that subcommittee. Peter?
Okay, and I did circulate a draft subcommittee report. Obviously, Dave's email and updates superseded some of the information in that. So going through the building subcommittee report, one of the items from last month that still wasn't addressed was providing some sort of protection around the corn crib at Patterson farm site, given the slate situation on the roof It sounds like Public Works is going to proceed with putting up a fence soon. Might be good to memorialize that. I don't believe we identified any other safety issues that are relevant to where the public is at right now on our walks. The Volunteer Activity Day, I just heard Dave's update there, so I'm not going to add to that other than there is potentially much further down the road the possibility of maybe having volunteers participate in painting, but I'll go through that item a little bit more here in a minute. RVE provided a lead and soils report earlier this year in January, which wasn't obviously incorporated in the master plan earlier, and one of the upshots of that report is that there's lead paint contamination actionable levels around all but 3 of the buildings on the site. One of the things that does point out is that we needed to have lead paint testing on the buildings before we could accurately define what the scope of work is on the buildings or the measures that need to be taken during repainting and qualifications. Obviously, some of the buildings might not have lead paint because they were stripped before. There's a couple that have that appearance, but legally we have to assume there's lead paint on the buildings. That's the reason for looking to have it incorporated in the phase 1. It's unusual to do that in the phase 1, to actually go through and pull samples. That's normally part of the phase 2 section of a report, which is why we were discussing that as a separate funding activity yesterday. But it looks like there's a much more effective and faster solution in hand now. So we can't treat the soils till we have an answer on the paint on the buildings. Some of the buildings, we can't deal with the paint on the buildings till we define till we know whether it's lead-based or not. And on many of the buildings, you couldn't paint them anyways because the siding's rotting through or there's structural issues to a deeper level behind it. So separately of this, there was a circulation of work items that we think would make sense for year 1 or to create as a baseline for starting to talk about what could be proposed for a scope of work to go out for an RFP. It's pretty heavily detailed. We did discuss it some in the field yesterday. It looks like independently the building subcommittee and Dennis and Ron and the township, we all arrived at relatively the same priorities for what buildings we'd be looking at. What exactly would be done for work at each building still needs to be worked out, and again is highly dependent on the phase 1 investigation result. I don't know if we want to go through it in detail, but in general we were looking at the Jenifer farmhouse, the caretaker's cottage, the 2 smaller garages, the packing shed, and then over at Satterthwaite, the equipment shed that's in the back and the well house as being the logical things that can be done that don't involve large amounts of structural repair work. Oh, and separately, a higher priority item also would be replacing the roof on the corn crib, because it would eliminate the safety hazard and it would take load off the building if we replace the slates with something else like shingles or sheet metal.
And we did say yesterday that because that is not an inexpensive proposition to replace the slate roof on the corn crib, that we'd have to reflect on that when we have a better idea of the exact intention for that building, because it's quite an expenditure on the roof.
If we were to replace it with slate.
If we were to replace them with slate, but of course, the preservation-minded people would want to see the historical materials used, which is the slate, but that's expensive. So that there's more dialogue needed there. But what is important is it's going to be fenced off so that if a loose slate should slide off, there won't be anyone standing underneath it. That was always, that's the risk.
I have a question, because, I mean, first of all, Dennis, thank you for your comments about the preservation-minded people, but, because you're right. But I've dealt with some slate roofs in the past, and ones that are well over 100 years old, they usually can be repaired. I mean, there are some slates which are damaged and maybe cracked because of weather. So why are we sure this needs to be replaced and not just repaired?
The issue with the corn crib extends to the substrate underneath the slates. It's rotted away. So it actually would require removing the slates in order to resheet the roof or replank the roof in order to have something to attach the slates to.
Okay, thank you.
And like I said, I did circulate a spreadsheet. It's multi-tabbed, and obviously it's going to be a living document, but it is narrowing in on what a potential scope of, on what the work items are at the different buildings, and then the email I circulated around kind of made a suggestion on what tasks would make sense for early on. Obviously, the list of work items is huge and lengthy and way beyond the capabilities of what the township has budgeted for to look at everything holistically. But if we were to look at the exteriors on these buildings and minor interior repairs as necessary, like windowsills that are rotted out, things that we need to be done to stabilize the building envelopes, or structural issues in buildings that are actually being actively used, which admittedly aren't many.
Right.
And I don't know if...
Anything else from the subcommittee?
Actually, within the subcommittee items I distributed, I kind of pulled the items out of the spreadsheet of what would make sense at different buildings. I think it's more than what's the budget for year one, so obviously, if we were to look at Star Packaging, maybe we say we aren't doing certain items, or it becomes a RFP with adds and deducts for the scope. But that was in that building subcommittee list. The second page is a list of suggested work items. Also, the Phase 1 study report will have a pretty dramatic impact on what the costs are associated with it and whether some things could or could not be done by volunteers or contractors that are looking to volunteer resources.
Okay.
Fred, anything you want to add?
Peter's done an excellent job in reviewing the Solor Drury report and previous reports, and summarize that building by building of what the recommendations were, and found some additional items in his site visits as well. So I think we've narrowed down and focused on what's doable within the budget in a near term. So I think that's going forward will help us show some progress out there.
Okay. Anything else on this third agenda item? If not, I'd like to move to the fourth item, which is an update from the Nonprofit and Funding Subcommittee. But before I do that, I have to correct an oversight. I apologize to AOI because they were good hosts yesterday when we had the DeLuca brothers there. Touring all of Patterson Farm, but we started with the gem of AOI and active camp with children and activities, and it was a good way to start. So thank you for hosting that, Bet. With that, let's turn to agenda item 4. Ron or Joe, you want to kind of kick this off?
You want to kick it off, Joe, or you want me to just set the stage a bit?
Fine, please, yeah.
So, last time around, I talked about a lot of this, so I'm just going to try and summarize it as to what we learned from talking to 6 or 8 not-for-profit groups across the state of Pennsylvania. And we're going to talk to a lot more, even local groups, soon. But we talked to the Heritage Foundation, we talked to Pennsylvania Association for Not-for-Profit Agencies, a lot. And it was a consensus by everybody that this project is really unique. Unique in the sense that there are 2 things we're doing. We are managing these two properties, these two farms, and we're doing the things that 501c3 agencies do, which is marketing and fundraising. And what also sets us apart is that the numbers required to do everything we'd like to do are very substantial. So from that point of view, what we started to look at was that it's really a heavy lift to start with a not-for-profit agency and setting one up, and that where we probably needed to start is with a capital campaign and start to raise some funds so that we could get those funds together and then turn them over to the not-for-profit once we had that created over a period of time, Dennis. So that's that's the background, and I've already touched a little bit on the capital campaign, but I turn over to Joe because I think you want to talk about some of the things that now we're thinking about next steps.
Yeah, I would just add two things to that. Since the last time, well, I was unable to make last meeting, but since the last time we spoke, I had a conversation with Jeff Marshall. And Jeff pretty much echoed what Ron just said. He said, I don't think that you'll find a nonprofit to step in and do this. I think you'll have to be building your own. He gave some really also good advice in terms of funding, in terms of grants, as well as working with both our state and our federal legislators in order to earmark some funds and all for this. He did give one important contact, though. He put me in touch with Amy Hollander. And she is with the county, with Bucks County. She's responsible for the properties that they own, renting them out. And she said that Amy would be a good sounding board in terms of what types of organizations might be interested in leasing properties on Patterson Farm. So I have a call set up with her for next week, and I'm sorry, Ron and Dennis, I forgot to include you on that invite. It's next Tuesday, but I'll make sure that I include you to join that. So that's kind of one thing that's coming up, and that might give us, a little bit, we have some general guidelines from the master plan around agricultural heritage and also arts. But it might give us a little bit more insight into which of the buildings we should prioritize for the rehabilitation efforts. The other thing which I talked to Dennis and I reached out to Ron is when I spoke to Janice Mullen from the state, she's been in a similar situation, and she said a very important first step is that we think about what type of board we would like the nonprofit to have in terms of skill sets and things. She mentioned working with Pano, who is Ron, is it the Pennsylvania nonprofit organizations? It's PA nonprofit organizations. And she sent me a template. So I reached out to Ron and asked if we could start working on maybe putting together that matrix for what the nonprofit board would look like. And it would help us not just with the capital campaign, but also as we're doing the capital campaign, we might be able to start recruiting people to fill out the board of that nonprofit.
Yeah, and I would add to that in the past, Pano and their consultants, for example, at Pennsbury Manor, where I've been chairman, they have been very effective in helping us develop bylaws. They've actually looked at our board there and made some comments about training, et cetera, et cetera. I very much agree with where Joe's going with this, that we should reach out to Pano, and if there are some funds, we may need to get a consultant, but I'll come back to the committee. Joe and I will come back to the committee with a more specific recommendation in the near future on that.
One thing I'll add to that, when you're talking about seed funding and other things to get the ball rolling, I think we could probably take advantage of the township's existing 501c3 that we have specific for township activities. We do that with the Garden of Reflection as well. That's where a lot of money sits for that, and eventually that could be, I'm thinking aloud, but that once something is set up, we could just transfer the funds. That way we can put it in an account that's protected and all that.
Yeah, we discussed that with David, and he feels that's an efficiency route, because it'd take a while to form all the paperwork and reviews for a 501c3 if we were to create a new one. And so that fund is there. It is a 501c3, and that would be the repository for the early seed money that goes in. And I think at this stage, when we talk about a capital plan, we're talking about some seed money. We've had some very productive discussions with some local residents. I mentioned the DeLucas. And we also had a very favorable discussion, a productive discussion with Congressman Fitzpatrick's office, and they're going to be running some reports. We just have to get one report first out of the township, but they're going to be willing to run a screening of reports for federal grants that could possibly be available that might fit with the right keyword searches, et cetera. So we're at that seed stage, and I think I'm feeling, as someone who spent a lot of time in venture capital, you work to get the seed money and then you get the venture money. The seed, and Joe has as well, if we can get a significant volume of seed money, that's the momentum. That's how you create the momentum to then carry further and go to other local sources. But I'm feeling pretty good about that. Nothing's in the bank. Nothing's delivered. But we're getting some soft circles on some things. So that's what we want. Other items?
No, I don't think at this point. I mean, we could go right into what Joe is planning when he's bringing SHPA in, and how potentially we could kick the capital campaign off at that time, if you want to do that, Mr. Chairman. I mean,
Right, okay.
Joe, you want to talk about that event, and then I'll talk about how we could build around it?
Okay.
I'm glad you brought that up, Ron. Thank you. Because the Historical Commission had our meeting last night and we talked about the event. So just to set the stage, the township won a Community Initiative Award for the work at Slate Hill Cemetery. And as part of that award, someone from the State Historic Preservation Office will come out and make an official presentation to the township. We'll figure out if it's to the Board of Supervisors or to David or, to the Historical Commission. We'll work through that. But the date for that is going to be September 14th. We're looking at doing something late afternoon-ish, like 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. We picked the 14th, which is a Saturday, because we would be able to use Sunday as the rain date. And what we're going to do is probably something a little bit low-key, just kind of an ice cream social. The whole thing, people will come, have some ice cream. We're going to do the presentation of the award, snap some photos, and that'll be it. So I wanted to kind of nail that down so I could come back to this group and, begin to say, how could we work together to leverage an event at Patterson Farm, since, the board, a lot of the people we're thinking about, leaders in the community, our state and federal legislature, our, Board of Supervisors are going to be at both events or be invited to both events anyway. So how can we work together in order to make that happen?
So what we're kicking around, Dennis, is using that same time and then being the kickoff for the capital campaign for Patterson Farm. Now, that may or may not work, but at this point, we're kind of targeting on that, and we're starting to put some meat around those bones. Whether it is a major public event with media and all that, or rather a more private event, is another question. I know you and I have discussed some of the invitees, obviously the Board of Supervisors, local and federal state representatives. SHPA would be there. That's the State Historical Preservation Office. Local leaders, Wegmans, McCaffrey, Shady Brook, et cetera, affiliated organizations, AOI, and members of the community, HARP, and others. And that would be the kickoff to the capital campaign. Now, a lot of that needs to obviously be worked out. There's a lot of details that would go into that. But Joe is giving us an opportunity on that day to do first the celebration for Slate Hill, and then perhaps the celebration of our kickoff to the capital campaign.
I like the idea. Let's leverage the dignitaries that are in town. If there's the power of a deadline, that's how stuff gets done. So we have September 14th with the 15th as a rain day. It's a good date to work towards. I think we should do everything we can to get ourselves in a position to kick it off by then. We won't do it wrong. If we're not ready, we won't do it. If it's going to be done, it's going to be done right. But there's no reason why we couldn't do it right by then, from what I can see right now.
Yep.
Okay. Dan, did you have a?
No, just
Oh, oh.
processing everything. This is good. That's all.
All right. Let me, so I think we've wrapped up that agenda item? Thank you. These guys have been doing great work all around. Is there any other business that anyone wants to bring forward?
Dennis, I just wanted to give a quick update. I mean, one of the other reasons which I serve on this committee is because of the application of Patterson Farm to the National Register of Historic Places. So
Yep.
I think I said before that our goal is to get that submission submitted by the end of the year. We're working on, there's two major pieces really of the submission. One is the architectural description, and the other is the statement of significance. So we do have a volunteer who's working with us from the Historic Preservation Program at Bucks County Community College. She actually is a township resident. So she's been going through the work that Solor Drury did, the photographs, the description, the drawings that we have, and making sure that all the information there could be, reused for a National Register submission, or if we have any gaps. And then Helen Hines and I have been working on the statement of significance to make sure that, looking at agricultural output as well as, a little bit about the history of the ownership of the farms and the relationships they have between each other. We're going to have a checkpoint with SHPO in September. We'll have our first drafts to send to them, and then we'll get feedback and go from there. So I just wanted to give that quick update.
Joe, quick question for you on that. I'm assuming you do, but just in case, do you have access to PA Share and all of the previous reports and studies that have been done for the farms?
Yeah, we do, Dan. Yeah, in fact, that was one of the things that we reviewed with SHPO before, and there's some open questions that they had around the previous submission that we need to make sure that we address.
Okay. And for everyone else's information, PennDOT, whenever they do a big project, has to do a Section 106 study, and they did a fairly large one several years ago.
Okay.
For the whole farmstead. That's very useful information.
Great. So, bottom line, you think you're on track for a year-end submission? You're on target, right?
Right. Yes.
Great. Good to hear. Good work. Any other business to bring to the committee? The only other item I would bring is that we have a chairperson, we have a vice chair, we have yet to elect a secretary. We've been taking turns as taking minutes, but if there's any member interested, we could in being nominated, we could vote on that. All right. Review of next steps and assignments. Some of our note takers, could you maybe help me out on that?
The one thing I have is just having committee members notify David Kratzer about availability to join the site survey with the environmental consultant.
Economic Redevelopment Authority, right.
So on that note, is that something, there's going to be a pre-meeting, or folks wanting to actually attend the site assessment?
Sorry, you missed that part. The Bucks County Redevelopment Authority has.
Yeah, they're going to.
Yeah, they're going to, and what they've asked for is they want a kickoff meeting in the next week or so. They would like a couple members of the committee to attend that, in addition to township and other folks and the consultants. And so we just asked the members to give Dave their availability, and if he can come up with a common time that works so that we can have that kickoff. We don't want to hold up the kickoff meeting. We want to get it underway. Yeah. Okay. With that, I think we're ready for public comment. Are there any members of the public, first of all, on Zoom that would? No light. Okay. All right. Are there any comments or questions from members of the public present? Hearing none. Okay. Well, thank you for that. With that, I appreciate the work that this committee has been doing, and I also want to say, in Dan's presence, the cooperation and efforts that we're seeing from the township staff have been nothing but impressive. From Public Works to Dave to Jim Majewski, it's just been kind of a seamless machine. There's no tension, no drama. I'm impressed, and I want to compliment them.
We've seen it on multiple facets, and I think they've gotten the message from this committee and from the board that this is a top priority for the township. So they're excited about it themselves because they're stakeholders in this too. So
Great. Thank you. Well, thank you for that. All right. With that, is there a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Very good. Thank you all.